Hey, members of the Board of Administration for the Network of Undeniable Blessing. I sent an email a while back saying that I had some strategic priorities that I really wanted to share with you as the board, but I didn't have a chance to elaborate on at our annual conference in June. That's what happens when we do full translation. I cut my message in half, but I wanted to share with you four key strategic priorities in the coming year. First is a disciple deep. Then we want to empower more young leaders, create a healthier, thriving culture for our pastors and leaders, and really lean into a unified CalNEVA, California and Nevada network of conferences. So, first, the whole focus, as you could tell from annual conference and from the commands of Jesus, are to disciple deep, handcrafted disciple making, discipling deep. So we want to calibrate all of our training and meetings around disciple making very significantly this coming year. We're going to do some rapid deployment of healthy coach disciple makers. We have really leaned into partnering with Ken Worley as the new director of coaching for our conference in conjunction with the leadership of Immaculate Adeshida on the MEG board to certify and raise up better trained coaches for our pastors in development, pastors that are currently existing, so that we can provide a better coaching on disciple making and their own spiritual formation. We also want to be telling more and more stories because this really sparks things. The testimonies of the saints are incredibly important. More and more stories and testimonies of excellent multiplication that are going on in our network of churches and beyond. But there's great things happening just within our almost 40 churches in Northern California and Nevada. One of the things I leaned into at annual conference was that Jesus discipled deep and he started young. He himself was 30 something, maybe in his late 20s. Most of his disciples were in their teens and 20s, maybe a couple might have been in their 40s. But Jesus had a real focus then on reaching youth and the next generation. And so do we this year. We want to calibrate all of our camping structures around youth. And by the way, Jason Santos did such a great job at reigniting. In fact, that was his theme, ignite our family camp this year, gearing it around ministering to youth and children. Everybody's welcome, but the primary thrust was around youth and children. And many good things happened. Many gave their lives to Jesus and made commitments to consider entering into ministry, which leads me to my second big initiative for the coming year, starting in 2026. I want to unleash Project Lit leaders in training for people between the ages of 18 and 30. I envision a cohort of 12, not more than that, because of what we intend to do together. Young leaders from our churches, nominated by pastors, that I'll have the opportunity to pour into personally over the period of a year, at least monthly connections, but also 4 to 6 in person group visits to some unique, powerful, multiplicative ministries that we're doing in our conference and outside of our conference to give new vision for these young leaders about what can look like to do ministry in fresh ways. I hope after that that we will have a cohort of young, just amazing leaders full of the Holy Spirit that have a fresh vision from God so that God can pour new wine into these new wineskins with the promise from us, the board of administration, the older leaders in our network, to empower them to do what God is calling them to do. And so this is going to lead to some new things in our network, I'm confident. I'm also encouraging all of our regions to have at least one youth gathering regionally uh, throughout the coming year. And that might not be regional, it might be linguistic, that might be people group targeted. But regardless, it would be fantastic if we could really leverage the blessings of all of our area, our regional churches toward reaching youth. We've initiated last year and have leaned into this year, starting some things to build a more thriving culture for our pastors. As you know, because you've heard many times now, uh, pastoring is tough. by the way, I've had a lot of jobs. It is unique. It is not tougher than many jobs, but it is tough. And part of the reason is because there is very little support in the role. Many pastors, even when surrounded by a congregation, feel alone and unsupported. So, in trying to create more of a thriving culture, we're going to be uh, leaning into our lead meetings. That's our monthly pastor meetings where you learn, encourage, hold accountable, and dream together. We're going to be leaning into that disciple making training, but also a focus and intention on health and wellness and providing some encouragement together in that regard. You, board, put together with the guidance of our Ministerial Education and Guidance Board and our Blessing Catalysts, together, we've created a new sabbatical policy. So every 3 years, a pastor is all but required. I mean, you can have an exception, but you got to advocate for the exception to take a month for a sabbatical. Deep work, not vacation, but a chance to renew your body, mind, and spirit in a way that will increase your fruitfulness and effectiveness in the church. And I hope and pray deepen your relationship with your creator and your savior, perhaps even getting more in touch with yourself and your family. And in that regard, we also want to provide better access to spiritual direction and mental health counseling as needed. And we've begun to make contacts with people that are willing to come alongside of us in that regard. Kind of the big thing on the table right now that, well, for me anyway, it's definitely in the back of my mind, has been, as you know, for many years, we've talked about this, many of us in the board of administration, is connecting our conferences. And different phrases have been bantered about, whatever the word is. Network of networks, or connecting conferences, or merging, or uniting. I use the word United Cal Neva, for example. But look, ultimately, this means that we want to be able to align the leadership, the efforts, the ministries of our regional conferences in order to better support local churches to save more souls. I mean, that's just the heart of it. I think there are uh, five at least really good and compelling reasons to do this. As you know, I've been advocating for this for some time, gently, but it's in my heart. And so, I mean, the number one reason is more souls saved. And I think that more souls saved is going to come as a result of the reasons that I'll throw out. One that I don't have listed here, I just want to share it because to me it's actually virtually number one. So, at least in the state of California, there's a lot of division, right? So, you have a Southern California ethos, you got the Northern California ethos, but what does that mean? I mean, you got the Bay Area, which is very, very different from the Central Valley, which is very, very different from mountain regions, which is very, very different from the far north, and very, very, very different from inland empire in Southern California. There's even been talk, as you know, of different states kind of being formed, hiving off from the state of California. I live in a section of the country right now in Sonora where we have a lot of people saying we need to have the state of Jefferson. Well, there's a lot of value in thinking about the ways in which you can separate so that like minded people can accomplish their tasks better alone without the problem of dealing with people who don't think the same way that you do. But that's not the way Jesus called us. Jesus called us to actually find ways to work together in our differences and diversity to forge common values, common goals, and create a better life together. That's at the heart even of the mystery of the gospel, where you see the mystery of the gospel revealed is that Jew and Gentile might actually be together, that you would bring very different kinds of people together. Well, what if the Free Methodist Church said instead of, it's we got a little vibe in Southern California, we got a vibe in Northern California. Those cultures are so different they can't do anything together. I actually think that it is a symbolic and spiritual imperative to say we can cooperate together, even if there are differences in our culture, and let's show the world how in Jesus' name. So for me, that theologically, philosophically, and spiritually is one of the key drivers behind this. I believe that leads to more souls saved. But here's ways in which I think that happens. First, it also expands our missional impact. Missional impact, follow the mission of Jesus to go into the world and make more disciples, right? So, how do you do that? You do that primarily through networking relationships. I can't share the gospel with anybody I don't have a relationship with. I can go cold call door to door, but that's not the way the gospel usually is spread, historically or in our own time. However, think about this. We've been able to plant churches in areas with people with whom we have connection. Yeah, I know a guy who has a house. He'll let us have a Bible study there. What would happen if all of a sudden some of the powerhouse churches in Southern California had free reign to call up and connect with all the networks in Northern California? We could begin to see more church planted because of that missional relational connection. And likewise, but if the pastors and church planters and called young people from Northern California started being have free access and knew the people in Southern California to reach out and call them and say, you know what, I know a guy, I know a girl, let's go plant a church in that community. It just expands missional impact because it expands our network connections. Likewise, right now, the primary way in which leaders are resourced in Southern California and Northern California is regionally. So we have regional groups of churches, and that works really, really well in a lot of really good ways. But here's something we don't do particularly well. We don't provide the actual needed resourcing for churches going through particular stages of growth or decline. And we can turn that decline to growth if we were targeting their particular needs. So if I were to take the span of church, from one end to the other, I would say micro to mega. That is micro church expressions, missional churches, meeting in a living room, churches of 5 to 15 to 20 that have the capacity to expand and to multiply, and mega churches where you have 1,000 people that gather on a Sunday, Saturday and Sunday, and then there's small groups that meet throughout communities, and then everything in between, small, medium, large. All of these different sizes of churches have very different needs, particularly if you think about growth in terms of what those churches might be looking for. I'm not going to assume that every church is looking for, but Jesus kind of did say, "Be fruitful and multiply." So let's assume that it's a good thing for a micro church to think about how they can multiply more effectively, for a mega church to think about how they can multiply more effectively, for a family church of 150 to think the same. Right now, we have a number of churches on the cusp of becoming large to very large churches. We have a few large churches that are right at the edge of possibly breaking through into the 500 and above variant, where you move from being a large church to a corporate size church, which has the real potential then to become even a mega church. Now, I'm not in terms of sizes and all that, we could talk about whether those are good or bad things. But one thing I can tell you, each one of the pastors leading those larger churches want to grow more through church planting, through growing the size of their own congregation, through increasing missional impact. We don't have many people in our conference. Frankly, we don't have any people that are leading currently in the network of undeniable blessing, but have the experience to bring a church of 400 to a church of 600, or a church of 600 to a church of 1,000. But in Southern California and in the Pacific Coast Japanese Conference, they do. Now, we could just network and say bring a coach in from there, but with all the different schedules and everything happening, that's super, super difficult. Likewise, by the way, our missional movement is stronger than many other conferences, including, I think, Southern California. So, what we do in terms of the rapid deployment of well discipled church planters, we could really bless Southern California. Frankly, the growth edge, in my opinion, as I look at the future of the church, is bivocational, rapidly deploying, rapidly multiplying leaders who are planting churches, who are planting more churches. That's just the current trend. That's the future, as I see it, in a world in which a church of 100 is never going to be able to afford $5,000 a month to pay for health insurance for their full-time pastor. So we need to think differently about these things. We are nimble and able to think differently. And I think we can bless the Southern California conference in a big way. All of this is to say, if we were to do more of a connection, even a merger, I think we could see a reorientation of the way we provide leadership support for churches based upon need more than based upon region. And I'm really excited about that potential as much as any other aspect, which the next aspect I'm going to talk about, streamlined structure, is a piece of that. I have to be administrative in my thinking in my role as a superintendent. Um, I'm not by nature that way. I want to think about winning the world for Jesus and telling the next soul about the good news of the gospel. But at the same time, thinking structurally and strategically to be able to streamline our infrastructure between the conferences is that would just be a boon. It would be a godsend, in my opinion. So right now we have three conferences: Pacific Coast Japanese, Southern California, Network for the Undeniable Blessing, that have completely separate infrastructures in place to manage budgets, to pay conference staff, to fund and organize training opportunities, to do MEG board training and development, and you name it. We have all these different ways of doing things, which, by the way, different ways of doing things isn't bad, but we're paying for and creating ways of doing things that are not very well aligned. So I really think that if we could come together as our three or even two conferences, we would see streamlined infrastructure that would be a cost savings and a time savings so that we could do less with kind of the structural overhead and more with employing resources into our local churches, which is really where the rubber hits the road. Everything I've talked about has been surrounding the big goal of resourcing local churches to accomplish the vision that God gives them, even as altogether we seek to multiply spirit led believers who lovingly belong and undeniably bless the world, or to catalyze the spirit filled movement, spirit fueled movement that catalyzes the multiplication of leaders, churches around the country. So, either which way, as we catch that vision, as we know our Free Methodist way, as we hold the heart of our values near and dear, man, the ability to bless local churches with all their different expressions of those core values will be magnified exponentially in all the ways that I just talked about. So that's not just a blank statement. Every single thing I just talked about specifically supports local churches in their mission. And all of that means more souls saved. Well, look, those are the four strategic priorities coming in to the next year: disciple deep, empower young leaders, project lit, thriving culture, and a unified town NEVA. Well, let's, I hope and pray, get on board together as we help strategically organize our own resources. We haven't merged yet. We need to keep our eye on the ball very plainly, but potentially part of the other ball that we're keeping an eye on is how we can do more cooperatively and maybe even so synergistic that we become one with our partner conferences, which is what we're going to be talking about when we all gather for Seeking Together in just a few days. God bless you, friends.